Okay, great. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get started with a little introduction here while people are still logging in. Um, Thanks everybody for joining us. Tonight's Farminar, we've got Mark Peterson, who is a current Vice President of PFI's Board of Directors, and he's a farmer down in southwest Iowa in Stanton, and he's going to talk about how he's been growing cereal, rye, and buckwheat for seed as a third crop in his rotation, and he's going to talk about how that early harvest allows him to plant a diverse cover crop mix for grazing with his neighbor's cattle. And then also tonight we've got Colten Catterton, and Colten is a sales agronomist with Green Cover Seed, and he works with Mark to put together his cover crop mix, and so he'll talk about this mix that they put together for grazing and what kinds of things you need to consider when you're choosing a cover crop mix. So I'm Steve Carlson. I guess I didn't say that. I work with Practical Farmers of Iowa as a beginning farmer and program associate. And I'm the host for this Farminar tonight. And so I'm going to do a little intro here about PFI before turning it over to these guys. So this is part of our 2016 Winter Farminar series. We do these most Tuesday nights between like November and March at 7 o'clock right at this time. So this is the schedule for the next few weeks. Next week is another small grains topic. Next week we've got George Schaefer, who's a PFI farmer from Kelowna. He's going to be teaming up with Aaron Silva, who is an organic cropping systems specialist at the University of Wisconsin. So it's another good one next Tuesday night, and then we'll go on through about March 8th. And we do record all of these, so if you miss one that you wished you wouldn't have, you can go to that link there on the screen and find a recording of it a couple days after we do it. So a little bit about PFI. If you're not familiar, we started back in 1985, so this is our 30-year anniversary. We're a nonprofit organization made up of farmers and friends of farmers, and our farmers come from farms of all sizes and enterprises and from across the state and far beyond Iowa. So we have a really diverse big tent that we call it. And the mission at Practical Farmers of Iowa is to strengthen farms and communities through farmer-led investigation and information sharing. And we do this, we accomplish this mission by helping farmers practice an agriculture that benefits both the land and the people, and we accomplish that, through things like this Farminar. Our values at PFI are welcoming everyone, creativity, collaboration, and community, and viable farms now and for future generations, and stewardship and ecology. So like I said, we are a member-based organization, and if you like what we do, we encourage you to join us and plug into what we do. If you join PFI, it allows you to tap into our network of members, which is really the greatest benefit, just being a part of such a great group, learning from each other. But you also get our newsletters, you get discounts to our events, you have the opportunity to participate in research projects and a lot of our beginning farmer programs, and your input really helps guide our programming as well. And so I encourage you to go to our website here. We have an event calendar that's just chocked full of stuff this time of year, PFI and non-PFI events. There's tons of great things for you to plug into if you got the time. But the big thing that we're talking about right now is this weekend, which is our annual conference, and this year's theme is celebrating 30 years of farmers teaching farmers, and we've got dozens of great sessions and fun activities and things planned. The keynote for this conference is John Kempf, who is a farmer and founder of Advancing Eco-Agriculture, and he's going to talk about the common characteristics of successful farmers. We've also got a SARE Farmers Forum, which is Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education. They're going to bring about 6 different farmers to talk about their on-farm research projects. We have tons of networking opportunities and really a whole lot of fun stuff. Our pre-registration for this conference is closed down, but you can go to the link right there on our website to learn more about it. You're welcome to show up on Friday or Saturday, and you can pay for a day or two of all the conference stuff, so you haven't missed out yet. Come and join us. It's in Ames, Iowa, as it says. And a part of this conference that you might be interested in is our what we call a pre-conference short course, which starts on Thursday and runs all Thursday afternoon and all Friday morning leading up to the conference. And it's really an in-depth look at growing a large variety of small grains in Iowa. And it's going to feature a number of farmers, researchers, and experts. And this is going to fill up. So if you're interested in this, check out the website for more details and join us in Ames. So Farminar rules. Looks like everybody's getting the idea here. We appreciate that. Typing in your location and email address into the chat box there. We also have a little poll in the very bottom left corner just to try and gauge how many people are watching. So if there's a couple of you, fill out that poll to let us know there's a few of you there. We use all this stuff for grant reporting. If you have questions for our speakers tonight, go ahead and type them into the chat box. And if they see the question and want to address it at that time, they might do that. But otherwise, I'll help keep an eye on all these questions that you pop in there. And we're going to reserve the final 30 minutes to go over questions. So in just about an hour or so, around 8 o'clock, we'll stop and just do questions for about the last half hour. So thanks everyone for joining us. I'm going to pull up Mark Peterson's presentation and let him take it away.
Thank you, Steve. Welcome and hello from Bentgate Farm here in southwest Iowa. We're located kind of in the southwestern part of the state. Here's a picture of our farm. We're 1.5 miles southwest of Stanton, Iowa, which is 20 miles from Missouri and 40 miles from Nebraska. To give you kind of an idea of our farming operation, we are conventional. We are using the full arsenal of herbicides and fertilizers at this time, trying to make some changes, trying to minimize some of that, particularly on the fertility end, trying to do what is necessary, but trying to spread it out and make the most out of each pound of fertilizer that we put on. We grow corn and soybeans using GMO crops for the most part, but then we have added in on at least part of the acres, usually trying to pick out some of the maybe less fertile acres that need some attention. We've been adding in some small grains. I believe it's 4 years now that we've been raising cereal rye. We've got cereal rye out as just a cover crop, and we also have cereal rye out as seed. This year also we did raise some buckwheat for seed, and we'll talk about that as we go along here. So along with our crops, we have what I call non-income producing livestock. What is non-income producing livestock? It is cats, dogs, and horses. A couple members of my family really like when I put up the horse picture, but I will guarantee you that they are non-income producing. Once again, the commercial for practical farmers, our mission is to strengthen farms and communities through farmer-led investigation and information sharing. I've been a Practical Farmer member for about 10 years now. Steve had up what it costs, what you pay to belong. Cost maybe isn't the right word. Invest, that would be a better word, because it's money very well spent. I get way more back out of it than what I put into it. It's the one organization, farm organization, that I belong to and feel that it's well worth being a member of. So anyway, as I said, we got started with cover crops about 4 years ago. Here's a picture in the spring. This was actually aerial seeded cover crop. Now, what grazer wouldn't love to see that in the springtime? And we'll talk some about grazing possibilities as we go on here, but I just want to throw that up. That was just aerial seeded into obviously corn stalks in the fall the year before, sometime in September that year, middle of September, and things. It was one of the better stands that we've had of just an aerial seeded cereal rye at a bushel the acre is what that is. So 4 years ago when we started with cover crops, I'd done enough research that I knew cover crops would work. What I didn't know is what would work on our farm. I'm convinced that what may work for me may not work for you, may not work for somebody else, but if you look around and do some perhaps experimenting, you will find cover crops that'll work for you. So that first year, so that we didn't have complete failure, we went ahead and tried several different methods. We actually did put cover crops out. We put annual rye and what we have with that, radishes. We put that out with the special disc and the Kinsey 15-inch planter. That was one way that we put cover crops out that first year. We did kind of a small drill, but it was a no-till drill, and we did no-till drill cereal rye and cereal rye with some crimson clover that way. And then finally, the third way that we put cover crops out that year was with the aerial seeding with the helicopter. For strictly cover crop benefits, protecting the soil, things like that, I feel for us, the aerial has done very well. Has it worked every year? No. Does it give us what we feel is a reasonable bang for the buck for the most part? Yeah, I do think for strictly a cover crop to protect your soil, it does a good job. This isn't the best of pictures, but right in the center of that, you can see the wash that is down through there, and that wash was already a couple years old when we seeded this with the cover crop. And actually, I guess I feel, there's my arrow, kind of down through here. You can see it's not maybe the best representation, but the cereal rye, even though we had what was it that year? It was a 5-inch plus rain. I felt like it was still holding the soil like it needed to. Maybe not 100%, but a lot better than what had been done the years before. So for us, I feel that we were getting our erosion control that we needed. So that first year, we went ahead, as I say, we have the full arsenal of chemicals, and we did use glyphosate, and we sprayed what we had out for cover crop it was around the 20th of April, right in there somewhere. And this is a picture. I like to show this picture. If nothing else, I can brag a little on our granddaughter. That picture was a week after the glyphosate was out, and you can see our future agronomist there can see that the leaves are burning back on the cereal rye. And we did end up with, I felt, a really good termination on that. In between, about 3 days after that picture was taken, this is what we got to deal with. On this obviously hadn't been terminated. This was cereal rye that we went ahead and we left that go to seed, and we'll talk about that here a little bit. But that was about 3 or 4 days after that termination picture was taken. There's where we had done some strips out in some bottom ground, trying both cereal rye and cereal rye with crimson clover. Unfortunately, that year, the crimson clover, we felt, I put that out with a drill, or excuse me, that went out with a helicopter in mid-September, and we felt like the second or third day of October, I was out there and felt like I had a good stand of the crimson clover and was really excited about that and thought maybe we had something going there. And then the next day or two we had, I wouldn't call them killing frosts, just temperatures that got down into the very low 30s, maybe upper 20s. And I never did see that crimson clover again. It was gone. It just plain disappeared. So did not feel like we got a good value for the dollar on the crimson clover, unfortunately. So here is just a picture planting into the residue that was left after the rye was terminated. Nothing special on my planter, just normal, normal, just the single no-till coulter up front. We do run dry starter fertilizer for the most part, so there is another coulter off to the side of the row. Does that really help with no-tilling into it? I don't know that makes a big difference, but that is something else. It is loosening some dirt in front of the planter, so maybe that helps us out a little bit along with the regular no-till coulter. I I hear a lot of times the objection or the statement that cereal rye is going to decrease my yield. Now I realize that this isn't real scientific, but in August of that year, with those strips, I had an agronomist that was doing nitrogen tests for me, and unbeknownst to me, he went out in the field the one day and came back with these 6 ears. He knew where the strips were, and he brought 3 from where there was no cover crop and 3 from where the cereal rye cover crop was, and the 3 on the right side of the screen are where there was no cover crop, and then the 3 on the left side is where the cereal rye cover crop was, and on average they're 3/4 of an inch longer. Now, does that mean that we had an increased yield? I don't have yield monitor in my combine, so it's really hard for me to discern that. I guess what I would say, if nothing else, this should, in my mind, laid the argument that you're going to take a yield loss to cereal rye. It kind of laid that to bed for me. Yeah, I feel that we did have a yield increase. Maybe we did, maybe we didn't, but I don't feel that we sacrificed any yield to have the cereal rye out there. Also that year, this is still the first year that we had the cereal rye out. We did let some more go a longer period of time, and then no-tilled soybeans into it. Obviously, that's just a 15-inch Kinsey planter. You can see in the background, we did end up, as an experiment that year, we saved some for seed, and we'll talk about that here in just next slide or two. But this is no-tilling into the cereal rye. Couldn't tell any difference in yield in the beans between where the cereal rye was. There were areas where there wasn't, and I guess I didn't feel that we sacrificed any yield in the beans. If anything, it seems like the cereal rye and the beans make a good complement to each other. Like it's like the cereal rye helps to stimulate the beans along. So I have felt pretty good about going with the cereal rye and soybeans in particular. There's just another picture we did that year. We terminated part and planted the soybeans, and then obviously where it's green, we went ahead and the thicker parts there, again, this is aerial seeding, and it's not as consistent as I would like. But that first year we went ahead and sprayed out strips where it was thin and planted those to beans, and then the thicker parts we saved and went ahead and harvested seed. To answer the question maybe before it's asked, we went ahead, or where we had the cereal rye seed, we had a yield every year that we raised cereal rye. I can't get much above 20-25 bushel of the acre at most. We have put nitrogen on. We have not used any fungicides. Maybe we should be using some fungicides. This is supposed to be my sort of chemical-free year, and yeah, fungicide isn't the same as herbicide, but I so far have resisted going with a fungicide, but we may have to do that because it seems like every year we're getting dinged on yield. Although this year we did, once again, no fungicide, but we did put on about 50 pounds of liquid N. We came up with what I would consider a normal yield and a normal germ. And down here in the southern part of Iowa and into Missouri, there were a lot of guys that got blanked out. They just didn't get any yield at all. So I guess I felt like we got along okay this year. So going on and talking more about this year, I don't know how it was for the rest of you. I know I see Steve McGrew on there, and I think he knows what I'm talking about. And from our area on south, this was somewhat typical this year. Unfortunately, we were wet, wet, wet. You'd plant a day or two, and then you were out for a week and a half, and it just you fought it all the time. And we got part of our corn in decent time, part of it not so good, and we actually finished planting corn within 2 hours of finishing up on soybeans. And for both. The last day that we planted was the 16th of June, so wasn't what we would like for a banner year. In with that, there's a cereal rye that we terminated. That was terminated about the 10th of June. We actually couldn't even get in with a sprayer on everything until about then, and even then it was marginal. But and I don't think the cereal rye hurt us any. I don't know that it helped us. We'll go on to the next slide here. There's a picture of the soybeans coming up through that cereal rye. You can see them in the various spots there. I have, at this time, my beans are custom planted, and the guy that plants for me, he was really nervous. He does not use cover crops himself, and he was really nervous about going into residue like this. His comment after he did it, he had already plugged his planter once on his ground, and with 31 rows, he was not going to do that again. And I understand that. So he felt he got in there as quick as he could, and he was still planting on his own. He didn't feel like it was any better. He did not feel like it was any worse. He felt that the planting in there was every bit as good as anything he'd been on his own, and he didn't plug it, so that's the main thing. He got them all planted those 2 days, so 15th and 16th is when we got our beans put in this year. Yield wise, we were in that 45 to 50 bushel, which for us is lower than what we would like, but there again, considering the year and the late planting date, I think we've got to be happy with that. We'll talk about some here shortly. There were some that didn't even get planted. So moving on, we did save cereal rye for seed again this year. We did our program just a little bit different. We did go ahead and harvest the cereal rye for seed. And then after the last year, trying to boost the income with the cereal rye, after the cereal rye was done, we went in with a multi-species cover crop mix that we'll talk about. It was some ground that needed some help, and we went in with this multi-species mix and was trying to regenerate the ground to a point. Well, this year, rather than, because of some opportunities that opened up after the cereal rye, we went ahead and planted buckwheat behind the cereal rye, hoping to raise buckwheat seed as a seed crop. And between the two, maybe, not getting enough off of either the cereal rye or the buckwheat to make it pay, but between the two, maybe you could draw enough. Yeah, you've got some extra cost, two groups of seed that you got to pay for, and two combinings that you got to do, and things like that. But maybe even with the additional expense, you can go ahead and pull off enough extra income that it makes it worthwhile. So there's the buckwheat was planted about the 24th of July. There it is again when it was flowering in late August. And then we went ahead and harvested. We harvested it at 2 different times. I tried it. I wanted to get it out at the same time as soybeans while we had the grain platform on. I see a question here. Have you done any soil tests to show soil quality improvements? Not far enough into it yet to have done that. No, have not done that as of yet. I guess I'm comfortable that we're helping it, but we'll see. The buckwheat, we went ahead and harvested right after soybeans, harvested part of it, and then stepped back out of it, went ahead and ran all the corn, and then finished up what was left of the buckwheat. The first time it was in right around the 20th, 25th of October. It was still too, actually it was, no, excuse me, it was earlier in October. It was around the 5th or 10th. We harvested that, and it was too early yet. It really wasn't ready. We went back in after the corn, and it was twice the speed, and and a lot smoother running at that time. So it paid to wait and harvest the rest of it after the corn, even though I really didn't want to have to mess with grain platform and all again. Although, is it a big deal? No, just lazy. So we went ahead and harvested 2 different times. Yield worked out to in that 400 to 500 pounds per acre. It didn't make 500. 500 was kind of the magic number that would have made it look pretty decent. We were close to that, so I'm not ready to give up on that yet. You know, for the first year, I guess I felt that it was a decent enough experiment to make it worth trying. Move along here. I know we need to be talking about the multi-species mix as part of the program. I'm guessing we've got some livestock producers on here. And here is some of these pictures will be from last year, some are from this year, but it's basically the same thing. Last year, our multi-species mix went in following cereal rye. This year, the multi-species mix went into what should have been soybean acres that we had to put in to prevent plant. It just was so wet clear through the end of June that we could not get the soybeans planted. So we went ahead and put it in to prevent plant. It's poorer ground, it's wet ground. By the end of July, there was a small window there when we could get in with a drill and get the multi-species mix put in. So we did put out a multi-species pasture mix, and that is pretty much as we speak just now being pastured. The guy that I work with on pasturing of the multi-species mix decided to kind of save it till toward the end this year. So he saved it. I'm not sure it was the smartest thing in the world. Cattle are going in there just last day or two, and we got 3 inches of snow today, so the ground's pretty well covered. So was it a good plan? I don't know, but that's his plan. So there's a picture that actually was taken last year in early October, which was it was about 35 days into the multi-species mix. That was the kind of growth that we got out of it, and we'll talk about that here shortly. There's a picture, it's a John Deere air drill, 30-foot air drill that a neighbor has it. He's putting the multi-species mix out. People worry about whether they're getting a consistent stand with the multi-species mix or not. I can't tell a big difference from one part of the field or another. We just dump it all in and go, and it seems to work out all right. That picture actually was taken this year, earlier in the season, probably about 15 to 20 days into the growth cycle on it. That picture was taken, that's some of the radishes. That was last year. The radishes were the same this year. There really wasn't any reason to take any new pictures because they were every bit the same. We've done very well. The radishes, by putting them in the mix and being able to plant both years around the 1st of August, you can get some significant growth out of the radish. Here's another one. Oh, well, now look at that. I'll be darned. I think somebody's got a birthday today. Happy birthday, Colten. And I think you're on mute, so there isn't much you can say. Oh, there he is.
Well, thank you, Mark.
You thought I was going to let that go today, didn't you? Anyway, there's Colten last year holding. There's Colten last year holding one of the radishes that was in the mix. And I can't say enough good about Colten, even if he is listening. Last year, when we first did this mix, he helped me, and actually did it. Took a couple of samples of the forage mix, and we didn't take the samples down where the picture of my wife was. We went into some of the areas that we felt were more uniform for the mix. If anything, maybe conservative on the low side, trying to make sure that we weren't weighing the results in our favor, and we were coming up conservatively with 2 ton to the acre of RFQ of relative feed quality of 144 to 146, as I remember, which for a non-livestock guy like myself puts you in that lactating dairy cattle quality feed, which my neighbor who does have cows, if you remember, we've got the non-income producing livestock, but I've got a neighbor that has cows, and he and I worked out an agreement to pasture the mix. I guess my thought is, let's get the residue cut down to a level that you can deal with in the spring, and let those cows get the nutrients out of it, and also at the same time process that feed along. You never seen anybody so happy to have cow pies out in his field as what I was, to have those. You couldn't take a step out in the field without stepping on one, and I thought that was great. That went to corn this year, and the soil test on that ground, I've only farmed that a couple of years, and when we took that over, the agronomist that did the soil tests for me said it's probably as bad a soil test he's ever seen. Did you spread manure on your fields? No, we didn't. Well, we did put some chicken litter on the year before, but what we did, since we just pastured this, the cows were just naturally dropping the manure back out there. I've had people say, well, why don't you chop this? Why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? I guess I'm happy with just letting the cows pasture it and naturally leave the manure across the field, rather than use the Gabe Brown theory a little bit, rather than hauling the feed off and hauling the manure back out. I guess a little bit like Gabe, I figured out that cows have legs and we'll just let them do all the work. So the agreement that I've got with my neighbor at this time, quite honestly, it's not written. We know each other well enough that I guess I'm comfortable that it's not in writing. Do I recommend that? No, I think it should be in writing. I'm not going to say what the dollars are. What I'm trying to do, I'm not really looking at this as a profit center as much as I'm looking at it as a regeneration for the soil. And if we can at least get all of our costs, the seed costs, the drilling costs, and all that out of it, I guess I'm happy. Last year, the first year out, we didn't get it done. Not quite. It was close. But when I went into it, that ground was bad enough. I really didn't anticipate pasturing, and it was kind of something that came up when my wife and I went out and found it as tall as what that picture was. I knew that, or I felt like I wanted to do something to get that processed further along the line. So for us, I've been happy with that idea. This year, with Colten's help, we designed our mix so that the cost was a little lower this year, and we will come out. It's not going to have cost me anything to have the mix out there, and I feel like it does some real benefits to the ground. Plus, of course, we've got the prevent plant payments on the soybeans. I think the way this year went, there's no doubt that ground was better off with what we did than what it would have been if we had tried to raise beans on it, because in a good year, that ground is 35 to 40 bushel soybean ground. So the yield wouldn't have been very good this year, I'm afraid, as late as it was getting. So that's what we chose to do. There's just a picture, cows out, happy cows, very happy cows. They got along real well, and I'm sure they'll do the same this year. So that's kind of, I guess, my spiel. I feel like I'm talking to myself here. So I'm going to go ahead and close my part of the presentation. I'm looking, was the rye that was harvested seeded a bushel to acre, Jack? Yes, it was. Did we spread the manure on the fields? No, that was just natural. Compaction issue, One thing that I did with the fellow that had the cows out there, they had to be out as soon as it started to thaw, which was right around the 1st of March. I think it was a couple days after the 1st, 2nd, or 3rd. But the cows had to be out before we started to thaw. So that's what we did. Nice placement ad. Yeah, okay. What do you do about fencing? Okay, good question. That's his problem. We do have line fences around the property. They're not 100%. They're pretty good. They're not 100%. It's rented ground. That's that's part of the reason I'm willing to give, shall we say, some on what I get for rent, because the guy that I work with that has the cattle says that whether it's my ground, his ground, or somebody else's ground, he's used to having to deal with fences, so he doesn't consider it a real big deal to have to fence ground off. So um, it's his problem to deal with that. Are your fields tile drained? They're not pattern tiled. They're not going to be pattern tiled. We do have tile in the fields because it goes with the intakes and the terraces. How many species? That picture that I had up there would be about 12 species. This year, I think we were a couple less. Yeah, okay. Colton's going to show us, so I will mute my microphone and we'll go on to the birthday boy.
Alrighty. Thanks, Mark. I didn't get to see that version of his PowerPoint when he sent it to me, but appreciate it. So I'm a sales agronomist. I get the pleasure of talking to customers from all around the country. If you look in the lower left-hand corner, that gives you an idea kind of where we sold seed in 2014. Now, the real benefit I get out of that is I get to talk to producers from a range of geographical agricultural regions. So when we start talking about different crops or different systems, it really comes in handy to bring those experiences back to other parts of the country. So, like after wheat mixes down in Kansas, where we do a lot of business, it very readily correlates to what we can get done here in Iowa. So first, in my presentation, we're going to start with talking about some concepts about species selection. I'll give you some more of the nuts and bolts about Mark's planting in 2014 after rye, show the mix, and then we will be talking about a little bit of utilizing unique opportunities such as prevent plant, which we've unfortunately had here in Iowa the last 3 years. Alrighty, so when you start looking at what species are available out there, there's over 100 out on the market, and there's even more coming into play. I mean, it can be as simple as, I had okra in my backyard, in my garden 2 years ago, and I thought that was going to be the new hot thing, and, we started out, we got 5,000 pounds. This year we got up to 20, sold that, and I would guess by 2017 we'll be probably pushing maybe 150,000 pounds of seed. So the biggest thing, I'm going to kind of skim over a lot of the nuts and bolts, but talk more broad concepts. So select species that best fit your need, management, and time. Now, a lot of these may just kind of blend together, so you have to go ahead and utilize other people's experiences, look at PFI publications, and just seek knowledge when you're trying to dip into new ventures. So just like here, you can look at this slide and pick out a lot of different varieties or species, but they all virtually just tend to blend together unless you have any personal experience with them. And so I could explain all these species. I won't be able to do it today. I don't know what I just pressed. Let's see. Okay. Sorry about that. I pressed some button. I thought it was going to shut me down. But so I could spend 2 hours talking about each species individually, but I'm just going to have to skim the concepts, and we'll be able to answer some questions later. All right, so it's not just plant species that we need to be considerate about, but the different varieties or different traits that can be carried in a lot of species. I'm going to go ahead and pick on the warm season species a little bit, just because they have not pick on, but showcase them, because they do have a lot of variation. There's a lot of genetic potential out there, some really strong breeding programs. And you know, the sorghum sedans are a pretty strong component to a lot of these summer mixes. Extremely drought tolerant, great rooting structure, probably one of the best at building your organic matter in a very rapid pace. You know, if you were able to cut a sorghum sedan when it's 3 to 4 foot tall, your root structure potentially could get twice as deep and 5 to 8 times as dense. And that came out of a SARE publication about building soil health. So just some of the traits that you can even get in the sorghum sedan packages would be like a brown midrib, which generally is going to increase your digestibility and palatability. But no, you're taking lignin out of those plants, but in doing so, that will decrease your standability, especially as you get later into the winter. You may want some of that lignin to keep that plant standing. Male stale options are out there. Basically, you know, we don't have any pollen unless is introduced. So if you keep those sorghums away from any type of sorghum type plant, which can include shattercane, then it'll stay to where you won't have any viable seed and you won't have to worry about controlling it in your field, if that potentially is an issue depending on your next crop. Like if you're going to a milo crop, I don't necessarily want sorghum sedans out there. Rachitic dwarf, it's kind of funny. We really wanted to pick this up because we had people losing cattle out in fields, and you'd find them a month later once they started mowing it down a little bit better. So for people that want to actually watch their cattle out in the field, when you got plenty of good conditions, then the Rachitic dwarf is going to be a little bit more standability in that package. And then when you're looking at photoperiod sensitive, let's say you have a long growing season, you know, you're planting it in May, and you want to keep it in a vegetative state, which is where you keep the nutrients spread throughout the plant, you know, actively growing, wanting to regrow. These plants will not trigger reproduction until the day length gets as short as 12 hours and 20 minutes. Now, why that's important is because that puts you all the way into September, just about, and not too far after that, we're going to be getting a frost, so it normally will not go reproductive. And then dry stalk is more important for if you're looking for a very leafy product and one that you can bale or harvest to keep that moisture content a little bit lower. Alright, so I saw Mr. Kelly was on here, and he can chime in the message box at any time, but this gentleman he's a PFI member, lives over there in northwest Missouri. So in 2014 he planted some different rye, trying to grow it for seed production, wanting to diversify his rotation. So he went ahead and got some VNS Northern Rye from the local co-op, and then we sent him some rustic cereal rye. This is genetics based out of Maine, but don't get fooled by being that far north. It is a very early maturing variety. And as you can see here, these were planted within a week of each other on the same river bottom, fields that had about the same treatment throughout a longer period of time. And so here we have about a 3-week difference in maturity. The rustic rye had me about in tears with all the pollen I was sucking in. And then we had the VNS Northern Rye, which was just starting to shoot seed heads, entering out of the sheath. And so just barely starting to get in the pollination stage. But Tim did tell me that the Northern Rye eventually did catch up 3 weeks later. But you know, the rustic would have matured. There was a little difficulty with moisture during harvest time, so that kind of slowed us down as well. But this is important when you're looking at varieties. So how does this small grain affect you? You know, if we want to get that mix in that much earlier because we need forage midsummer because our cool season pastures are going out, well, you're going to want to find some earlier maturing varieties. Now, yield's going to be important to you, but we can sustain yield. It's going to be very based on varieties. So go ahead and try put out some plots of some different varieties. See what package fits you. If we're cutting this for hay, you're going to want to get it in that flag leaf to maybe dough stage at the latest on these. So the earlier matures, the better off we'll be. Now, we did have a lot of problems, like Mark was talking about, as far as getting quality seed produced in the region. Man, it was rough. We had seed production fields from Iowa, Missouri, all the way to the Rocky Mountains, and there was a lot of disease issues, in particular head scab, fusarium. Um, and so what it caused is a lot of low germ seed, a lot of low test weights, poor yields. Really took a beating. There was so much rain throughout the Great Plains that even Colorado was seeing rust, which they never see because they never get that much moisture. What is the particular size for test plots? Or practical size? Well, I guess that comes down to your operation. If you're just looking at trying to get an idea, the characteristics of that variety, how's the lodging potential, when's the maturity dates. It could be as small as getting a 5-pound sample from different seed dealers. Or, Mr. Kelly had, I can't remember how big these were. You can type it in there, Tim, but it might have been 80-acre fields. Either of which, he was able to sell to a local co-op and get a pretty good price out of it, what he was able to harvest. Now, just because we're talking after cereals, it doesn't mean that it has to be just taking the grain. This could be after forage. You have to time that up, make that decision. And like we said, you generally want to try to get something with high biomass and early maturing, potentially the better. But haying a crop will get you in that field potentially 2 months earlier than if you had waited and gone to grain. We're harvesting these cereals over in this region probably, in the middle to third week of July in most places. Alright, so if there's any slide on here that I really have big concept available to you, this is one to focus in on. You want to utilize species that best fit the season that's remaining. Now, this will require potentially looking for seed outside of what's just carried at the local co-op, because you run into these situations of prevent plant, and they're trying to sell you what's on hand, and there's a lot better options. I'm going to go ahead and show you here after this slide kind of what is available. But so when you're looking at that window of the summer, the warm season, the heat, we need drought tolerance, we need heat tolerance, that May to July. We really want to focus on species that were naturally productive in those. When are people growing these seeds? How are they growing it? And so this would be a lot of your sorghum sedans, your cowpeas, your mung beans, your soybeans. But we want to hit those hardest. There are some great cool season options, but there's also some that are really going to flop and be a waste of your money. Some of those heat tolerant options that really thrive are your brassicas, really do well, especially when they're under that cool canopy of a warm season grass that can shade it. And oats really are stellar from as soon as you can get them in the ground in the spring to 30 to 45 days before they die in the fall. Now, a lot of times after cereal, we're hitting that sweet spot where we can start blending warm season and cool season species in that late July to mid-August. This is a little bit of a balancing act because you can get too heavy on the warm season grasses, and they'll eventually smother the cool seasons. So it takes a little bit of your management and selecting, or just if you're able to graze it and keep that warm season at bay to allow those cool seasons not to be smothered out. Now, mid-August to September, that's really where we got to start transitioning to cool season species dominated. These are the ones that are going to live through that first frost and keep on ticking. You can use some of the winter kill species, cool season species. They're not going to die at that first frost, most of them. They're going to hang in there. Now, we do incorporate some of your warm season rapid growing species. That could be your sorghum sedans, your buckwheats. They're really going to push hard for you. You don't have to get a whole lot out of a sorghum when a full seeding rate on that could be 4 to 6 pounds, and it's $1 a pound. So we're not talking about that much money if you can get a little bit of growth and one stellar root. Try to give those that are going to kill about 45 days. 60 days would be optimum, but 45 days for they're going to peter out. And as many of you know, we really start losing our selection come mid-September to mid-October. It's got to be cool season species, and it's got to be something that's going to overwinter. And I really enjoy my job in particular when I get to design custom mixes with high diversity. By the time mid-September, October comes around, you're down to something so simple as a dozen species. It's very basic, and you'll be able to build your soils during that time frame, but you're not going to build it nearly at the pace that you can during these other windows utilizing diverse mixes. When you start looking at like Gabe Brown and Dave Brandt, they're getting it done with the high diversities during the middle when you got a lot of growing units and heat out there. And then by mid-October to basically when your soil's frozen, we planted winter hardy cereals into the first week of December down here, and we've taken them to grain production. In 2014, that was actually our better crop, was the one that was planted last, first week of December. Now that's not necessarily suggested, but it is possible. You won't get much of any fall growth. I know in northwest Missouri I planted some triticale November 5th. I mean, you could barely pin hair see it. But come that first part of March, April, she really started to green up. So you just kind of got to anticipate that. Now I'm throwing these up here, not so much as these are set blends, but this gets you going in a ballpark of kind of the species you want to be targeting. I really don't encourage pre-made mixtures for any reason, unless you're like a gardener. You know, I work with some gardeners, and I can't devote a whole lot of time to them if they're less, an acre or less. So we give them some pre-made options, but you'll be able to look through these potentially later on, I guess, when they post this online. But I'm not going to focus on them. Alrighty, so we get into a really excellent plot that was put in Oakland, Iowa. If you're not familiar with Oakland, it's on the northern side of southwest Iowa, east of Council Bluffs. The next two slides are going to showcase those plots, but these are putting those big concepts of utilizing the species during the proper time and putting a face to them. So when you start looking at this, look at the planting date and look at the picture date. Those guys had a greenhouse when they put these plots in. I've never seen so much growth. This was just astounding for 5 weeks of growth. But on the right hand side, we have a cool season big biomass producing mixture. So we were looking at a lot of spring cereals, spring crops, ones that are going to push out the biomass as fast as we can. Moisture was no problem. The heat, gosh, I don't even know if we really saw heat this year. What did we get above 90? Maybe 2 days, 5 days. It really wasn't much. So it was perfectly ideal for both groups. But on the right, we can see that the brassicas really took and shined. And they actually dominated a lot of our cereals. There would have been some spring peas and some other species in here. Now on the left-hand side, we can see a warm season dominated mix. Now this would have been a very high biomass, grazing, forage producing type mix. We really didn't have cool seasons in it. I just wanted to show high biomass. Now, let's see. If you look, I got a little pointer up there. These pictures are side by side, so it kind of gives you a perspective of, when do I use my cool seasons and when do I use the species that are best suited for the condition. So we can see this warm season plot that's right here is right there in the picture. The amount of biomass difference between those is pretty astounding. I did not take biomass samples from this. I really wish I did, but this would have been well over waist high on me, and I'm about 6 foot, not quite. Now this would have produced a really high quality biomass over here on the cool seasons. It would have been staying lush. You would have had a lot of regrowth potential. It would have took you all the way in the fall, but you'd be giving up on total tonnage that you would get out of something like this. So if you're doing even maintenance or even stockers would really perform well on this, but if you need something to really pack on the weight and really run it through them, these brassicas and this cool season mix would be the one for you. Now, if you are grazing something this lush with this much brassica, I really hope you are putting something with some fiber out there, some real stalking material, some CRP grass or something to help slow down that rumen. Otherwise, they'll have quite a mess all over their rear ends. But let's see, the next slide, we're going to showcase a little bit different. So when we start talking about that time where you can start mixing cool and warm seasons, that's what this mixture is. We have a blend of warm, cool seasons. You're not hitting on all cylinders like you were before in the all warm season dominant mix, because you have to allow some sunlight to come through that canopy. Otherwise, you're going to smother them out. but it will give you a natural succession, which will lead you into the winter, where you'll always have some kind of green, lush vegetation. I'll show you that picture next. But over here on the left, this is a little bit of a pet peeve of mine, and this gets back to not utilizing the correct species during the right time. This this was the only one in the plot that I put in here, and it was a very winter hardy type mix planted in July. So this would be your cereal rye, this would be your hairy vetch, your red clover, your sweet clover. It is not what you're trying to do if you're trying to pack on the biomass. I'll go ahead and answer Tim's question real quick on nitrate concerns with sorghum sedan grasses, grazing. So there is potential for any species to have high nitrates. It's all a matter of how much is out there. You know, if you have a failed corn crop and you even sow brassicas out there, you could get nitrates. It could be any species. So you just got to be conscious. You know, what is the history of that field? Was there a failed crop? You know, was there a failed legume crop? You talk about packing on some nitrogen. Soybeans will do it for you, especially if you get hailed out. So be conscious of that. Take a forage sample if in doubt. I'll go ahead and I'm going to show you later on in the slides what those look like, and maybe some sources you can go and take your own forage samples. But when in doubt, always sample. And there's different times of the year where nitrate's going to be a higher concern, and the lower you graze those plants, you know, the sorghum sedans, if you get below that 6-inch, it's going to be mostly concentrated in that lower profile. So if you're moving your animals, or if you're letting them pick off the cream and move on, then we don't have to worry about it. But getting back to these cool season species, we can just see that this is not where we want to be. This warm season mix you see on the right is right here in this picture with the cool seasons. So when you start looking around at your local co-op or local information, make sure they're not just giving you what's on hand, but they're actually giving you insight on what's going to perform best for your conditions. And so when we start talking about, when do you need the forage, this shows just like that warm and cool season blend kind of put together. We can see the natural succession of the sorghum sedans dying off from the frost, and the cool season just now really starting to take over. These would be some of our Florida broadleaf mustards. Super huge biomass producing, but they're kind of neat. So when do you need forage? That's going to be a big dictator on what species you put in here. Whether you are utilizing it in the late summer, we're going to need a lot of warm seasons because we need to pack on the tonnage, and then that'll give you continuous grazing all the way into the fall. Fall can be warm and cool seasons. Early winter, we got to make sure those species are going to stand up to that winter, especially as we get later. And then, do you want any spring regrowth? So touching on that some more, the warm season species will tend to weather pretty rapidly. In particular, your warm season legumes, they just really go to kaput. If you look at soybeans or cowpeas, there will be just a hint of a twig. So if you're planning on putting in a lot of cowpeas and you want that for forage to raise your crude protein level, it just won't be there, and the cattle won't be able to get it because it's going to be slammed to the ground. Warm season grasses, so when we start picking out genetic traits, that's where your finer leaf products, your BMR products, they're going to fall apart faster than something like a true sorghum, something with more lignin, more standability. What's more important, quality versus quantity? Just a general rule of thumb, if you're looking for tonnage, you got to focus heavier towards the grasses. And if you want quality, lighten up on them grasses, allow more broadleaves to shine through that canopy, and you'll really bring up that relative feed value. So how long in the fall do you need green vegetation? Do you want something over winter? Your warm season is going to die in October. Cool seasons will live well through a lot of your frost until you start getting in the lower teens. It's all about give and take when you're doing these type of mixtures. It's very easy to get carried away and get too far on something and keep it from shining. We have some people that will put out 40 species mixes. We even have a high diversity mix, which is everything we swept off the floor. We'll put it out in our own fields. I mean, you can't really sell something like that to too many people, but so I mean, a lot of the species you'll never even see if you just go ahead and do something like that, just blind without trying to orchestrate it. Any thoughts on weed suppression using this approach? Can you describe on that a little bit more? We'll move to the next slide. So it's not just about producing forage production. We can do that. You can design a mix around forage production. Is there anything else you want to try to achieve? There's a lot of other benefits we can tack on and get a double bang. So, do we want big tap roots? Are we looking for nutrient sequestration, nitrogen fixation, or do we want to bring in the pollinators? And so that's where you got to be able to design kind of what you're thinking. So we utilize a smart mix calculator. I'm not going to touch on this too much. If you haven't utilized it, you can just Google smart mix. But what this tool does is it allows you to put in your zip code. It's going to tell you kind of your weather information, when your frost dates are. You kind of put in what you're wanting down in this area. It'll tell you how much heat units you normally have on a 30-year basis. And then you put in your goals. So I want grazing, I want erosion reduction, and soil organic matter. And then in here, you'll be able to pick out species. It'll give you rankings next to each species, basically how suitable they are for your goals. It'll rank your goals based on what you've selected. We do have a new attachment on it where it'll auto adjust. Basically all it's doing is making equal proportions of a full seeding rate for each species you have in there. If you notice, the full seeding rate on each one's 18%. So that's just trying to get you to 125% total. Alright. So, it's not just for the forage producers after the wheat. There is potential, or wheat or other cereals, but there is potential for other crops, whether you're using a grain milo like here on the left, or you're trying to utilize a forage sorghum, whether you need to pencil it with a hay crop, whatever. There's other alternative crops that we're trying to investigate here in Southwest Iowa. The biggest part is, do you want to market it, and how far are you willing to go to do that? Now, the beauty that I'm really excited about, and we've been working on this for a few years, is the oilseed sunflowers, but then you have a diverse mixture underneath. And so this is really something special, because sunflowers are a really unique crop in that it allows a lot of sunlight through the canopy. One of the biggest struggles we have is when you have a great corn crop and trying to get something to go through it, well, it gets shaded out and you don't have consistent enough success with that. Generally, more sunlight, better underseeding. So with this mix, we're able to grow the sunflowers, have a diverse mix full of pollinator species that are beneficial, and then we'll go ahead and we'll harvest these sunflowers in November, and then we have all this forage underneath. So what I'm telling you is that there's people that are able to get 3 crops off one field in 1 year. So you could have your spring cereal, your winter cereal, you could hay it or take it to seed. Now, if you're in northern Iowa, you probably got to lean more towards the haying or the grazing it out and then putting in this mix. So you got to try to pencil that. But you can drill this sunflower mix, harvest the sunflowers, and then graze it. Now, if you're going to the conference here this week, Robin and Kelly Griffith from Kansas are one of the leaders that started this practice. We worked with them on it since about the beginning. And we've been doing this for maybe 4 or 5 years, and people are getting away from having to spray for head moth, which is a plague in Kansas. It'll come in and destroy 30, 50% of the crop. By bringing in predatory and beneficial insects, they're getting away from having to spray. And so you have your forage or grain crop, you got sunflower crop, and then you got a grazing crop. That is potentially building your soil in a hurry. Have you grown sunflowers with red clover? It's totally possible. It's possible. We'll put some clovers into the mixtures. Generally, we're looking at flowering species, but you can tune this mix to anything you want. There's enough sunlight that comes through those flowers that you'll be able to get a stand. Will the diverse mix improve soil quality? No doubt when you're able to get those amount of rooting structures into the profile and then work them back in with cattle in the end, So getting back to Rob and Kelly Griffith, you'll be able to really pick their ear if you're there. But they said on the worst year in a dead drought, they'll be able to get 500 pounds of flowers. So, you're still getting something. And, worst case scenario, you just leave the flowers out there and let the cattle graze it anyways. Sunflower has a great, tremendous, dense root on it. We put in a lot of mixtures. It's not the same as your wild sunflowers. I about get shot when I go to Missouri and Iowa telling them let's plant some sunflowers. But these are domesticated high oil seeds, so they don't overwinter very well. I mean, things eat them very quickly. Wildlife. We tried doing this mix here in southwest Iowa near Clarinda. This year, the gentleman was going to sell them for bird seed, so it just comes down to marketing. But we never got dry enough to even plant it, so that didn't work out for us. All right, so getting the markets mixed. Steve, chime in if I need to speed up because I'll skip some if I have to. But so Mark's mixture, he has some specific goals. He was looking at nitrogen fixation, diversity. He was looking at rooting structures. And his next crop is supposed to be corn in 15. That was a typo on my part. It was coming after rye. He drilled it. He needed to be cost conscious. We don't get too carried away because he was just going to do it as a soil builder. In between there, he really had no idea that we were going to be grazing this. And he wanted everything to winter kill just for ease of management. He did spread manure before planting. I'm sorry the picture wasn't supposed to cover it, but I think it was about 2 tons, 1.5 to 2 tons an acre. All right. So I'll have to speed up to make question time. This is Mark's mixture. What we're trying to do is we were looking at a lot of broadleafs because we're going to corn. We were looking at a lot of nitrogen fixers. So we got pretty heavy on that. You can see by weight, we had about 37%. Seed count, 17. I would like to see these get higher, but the higher you get in legumes, the higher cost you're going to run into. Now, if you look at the grasses, that's pretty darn low on some grass rates. I mean, if you're going for forage, we need to be up in those things. But like I said, we were just going for a soil builder. Brassicas, being that 2 or 3 pound range total. And then broadleaves, you can get a lot of good seeds, a lot of great root structures, beneficial insects, and with these species, and they're really, in general, a very inexpensive family group. All right, so Mark's mix, he was talking about his RFQ. We use that as a gauge to determine, what kind of digestibility do we have, and this was suitable for lactating dairy cattle. You'll notice that we had results for the top, which is probably a little bit better of the side slopes. We took a sample of those because that was the poorest part of the field. This field was inherently pretty poor when we came in there. So there was some distinct differences from where he was in the bottom, where you saw his wife covered in forage, to the top, which was pretty moderate. Side slope was pretty poor. So we'll move on to tonnage. So at the hilltop, we had close to 4,000 pounds of dry matter to the acre. Side slope, it dropped down nearly in half. I mean, it was pretty visible. So let's assume that your field averaged 3,000, which it wasn't that much side slope, but worst case scenario. And let's assume you only allowed your cattle to consume half of that biomass. With a standard of 28 pounds to the acre of dry matter to support 1 cow, that would calculate to supporting 1 cow for 53.6 days per acre. That's holding out an animal pretty effectively. So let's pencil it. That forage ended up costing him 82.3 cents per head per day. Now I figured that with all this figured in here, and we're assuming that he covered the land rent with his rye crop. And so you're trying to make money on the forage thereafter. Now comparing that to hay, I put that down here. You can take a quick peek at that. What was the actual value if I was to hay this. And this was just working off of good numbers, not premiums. That was just listed here for Southwest Iowa hay. So I encourage you to take forage samples. This is a publication that I printed up. Just simple procedures. If somebody wants to get a copy of this, I can share it with you, or if you just want to indiscreetly go get some on your own. I like Oklahoma State's publications. They're generally pretty good on forage. And then for our customers, we go ahead and pay to sending in the forage sample for you. All right, so real quick, I'm going to fly through this. Prevent plant in 2013 and 15. How quickly we forget. I mean, it really wasn't that long ago that I remember in 13 we had 17.1 million acres. I didn't realize it was that much until I looked it up here. And of that, it was mostly in that northern Iowa range, northern central, northwest, quite a bit of acres. Now, we did have the unfortunate pleasure of having 6.6 million acres not planted this last year because of the excess rainfall. Iowa really didn't get the blunt of it. I'd say southern Iowa definitely below I-80 is where it really hit us, especially towards closer you got to the middle, from about where Mark is near Stanton all the way over to the river, more or less. Really not that many acres compared to our friends of the south in Missouri. 1.7 million acres not planted, twice as much as any other state in the union. So is it that common? Well, maybe you should be prepared for it and start thinking about it. But if it does happen, we had guys that went ahead and sprayed their chemicals. This field, a gentleman had sprayed some M-Vive. Now, looking up that chemical, it was pretty potent stuff. I really couldn't get too much to come in through that. And so we were looking, okay, it's a soybean chemical. What can we grow? Well, how about some Group 7 forage soybeans? And he has a lot of cows, so we wanted to go ahead and feed those. He needed protein. He's got plenty of tonnage biomass, he said. He had plenty of corn stalks, so we needed to get our crude protein a little higher and digestibility up. Now, the reason I put 2 pounds of forage sorghum into it, this chemical M-Vive was labeled for 10 months withdrawal period on sorghums. Now, you can't always trust the label, and they're just covering their tails on a lot of this stuff. But so I put in 2 to 3 pounds to the acre of the forage sorghum. The main reason is because these forage soybeans get a little they want to lay over a little bit, so this sorghum helps support them. But also, when you look at why soybeans are brought here, it's brought here for forage. Well, what we can do with that is great, but when you're doing silage, you need more energy content. You need more sugar. So you can do that by 2 ways. You can either add syrup at the time of ensiling it, or you can add like a forage sorghum, which is high in sugar, and will supply you with everything you need. So this mixture actually had 5.8 tons to the acre in dry matter. So if we go back a slide, I sampled what was just soybeans down here, because the M-Vive was actually working in this bottom piece, higher organic matter. It looked like it held out a little bit better. That was like 5.6 tons to the acre of just soybeans. That was bigger than anything I could find on records. So our genetics have gotten better since we've gotten away from it as a forage type variety. But when I did the mixture, I had only 2 or 3 pounds of the forage sorghum. Well, full seeding rates, 4 to 6. I was hoping it was going to kill more, but it didn't. We ended up with 5.8 tons to acre dry matter. We saw a 60% reduction in soybeans just with those 2 pounds of sorghum. So when I start talking about, you're going to get carried away if you get a little heavy on the sorghum, it's very possible. Now, feeding is going excellent on this. You can see the forage sample down here, kind of how it turned out to them. If you go ahead and analyze these numbers, they're not too bad. I would like to see them a little higher. And basically, the sorghum's got too far along. Because this was a prevent plant, he planted in mid-July, and he couldn't harvest it until November 1st. So you got to be conscious, how is maturity going to affect forage quality. That's kind of my contact information. My lovely wife, who puts up with me when I don't get to talk to her as much during the summertime because I'm out here helping a lot of farmers, but I love it. And so if you have any questions, I guess we'll open up the floor.
Thanks, Colten. That was really great. So if anybody has any questions, go ahead and get them in the chat box. We got a solid 15 minutes left of our time here with these two guys. Mark, if you want to flip your mic back on, I don't know if you have anything you wanted to add, any questions for Colten or anything you wanted to speak up about. Otherwise, we'll wait and see what questions people have here in the chat box. It is Colten's birthday, and that's probably put his picture of his lovely wife up there. She's probably waiting to take him out to dinner or something.
Yeah.
Is it too late for tacos and Imogene? South,
Taco Tuesday, huh?
yes,
I don't know.
that's a
I don't
Southwest
know.
Iowa joke. Did any of
Have
my
you snowy roads?
mix survive the winter? No. The only no, this year none. Last year, because it was behind cereal rye, I guess I don't know how to set a combine, and there's a certain amount of the rye that goes out the back end of the combine, and that made it through the winter. But that was the only thing last year. This year, I don't anticipate that there will be anything since it was on prevent plant acres with no cereal rye in front of it.
Yeah, we designed that mix to die out.
Yep, that's what I wanted it.
We specifically designed it because that's the way you wanted it.
Yep, it is. One thing I would suggest too going forward, if I continue to do this with somebody that's going to graze it, I will try and identify who it's going to be and involve them earlier in the process. I don't think I know the grazer that did it last year and this year isn't all that thrilled on the sorghum sedan. It's wonderful for the tonnage, but with his management, it doesn't work well to try and stay away from it or try and strip graze or whatever during that freezing period. So I think for him, I would probably back off on that or work with somebody else. That's your options. But I think probably when you're designing that mix, if you can, it might be a good thing to involve them a little further or a little sooner in the process.
Yeah. It definitely would be good to bring him in, but the more he tramples into the ground, the more you're building your soil health too there.
You betcha. I'm fine with what's going on, and he's fine with it too. Last year was kind of an experiment, and he did it again this year. So that tells me that he thinks that it's working for him. So
Bruce, yeah, there's quite a few farmers that are trying to utilize this, especially in times that are becoming a little dire in commodities. We're getting phone calls several times a week, people looking to do anything different to try to make a pencil. And we have current farmers that are looking for grazers, and grazers looking for farmers. It's just a matter of matching them up. And I believe PFI has a program for that, don't they, Steve? Or
yeah, definitely we have options to help folks who are doing that. Really, one of the best ways is just through our discussion lists. But we do have a Find a Farmer website that helps, connect landowners with land seekers. So whether that's a grazer and a row cropper, whatever.
Yeah. Answer to Tim. Does anybody have experience with winter peas? Yeah, not great experiences, not up here. I guess last year I went ahead, it was the winter of 14, I went ahead and set up the drill to have 5 different seeding depths across a 15-foot John Deere. So I had to add half inch all the way staging down to 5 inches in the ground. I had the UNL professor go ahead and tell me that if you plant 4 inches deep, we'll be able to get them over winter this far north. Well, wasn't necessarily the case. I haven't been that impressed. We've been looking at other species. Winter lentils even showed better results here in southwest Iowa, but there's winter peas. If anybody else is figuring them out, please share it with the group, but I'm just not having much luck. I don't start using them till central Kansas, central Missouri, south, more or less.
While we wait for some more questions here, I should mention too that green cover seed is definitely one of our sponsors regularly for a lot of our events, including our conference. So I think you'll have, Colten, I don't know if you'll be there, but there'll be somebody there with a booth in our exhibit hall that can answer any follow-up questions, have some materials, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's great. This will be the first year I missed, I think, in the last 4.
Yeah.
But I will have a co-worker that will be there. His name's Brett. Make sure, if you know me, to go there and give him a hard time, ask him the tough questions, and I'd appreciate it. But He'll be there to help you and give you some information. And he'll have some free seed samples you can kind of throw around different areas and try it. And we do give out free samples if you want to try something. You want to try some winter peas on your farm. We can get you some stuff to try.
Yeah, Colton, looks like Tim said that he did plant some winter peas and the cows are still loving them. He's asking if you think they'll survive.
Possibly. I mean, we still got some cold winter yet. Now, when it got down to those -2s, did you have snow cover? That would have really helped you. What kind of growth stage? I've had them in plots next to spring peas, like a 40-10 forage spring pea. Let's say you plant those first week of September. Those spring peas are flat out running. Now you got to remember the winter peas are winter annual, so they're going to limit their growth going into the fall. They're not going to fully throw themselves out there. Any spring crops saying, I got to run and gun before winter comes. So it comes down to when do you need that forage? Do you want a little bit later? The winter peas are going to live a little longer, but they won't nearly give you the tonnage biomass that a spring pea would in that same time frame. I really hope they overwinter for you. It'd be a great observation. Make sure you share with others. No, I've had spring peas get knee high, just thick and rank, planted during that time of year, and winter peas will get 8 or 9 inches. Nothing to really get too excited about when you see the spring peas. The closer you graze them, the better off you'll probably be. Less exposed growing matter. The more green vegetation you have above, the bigger they get, the more susceptible they are to winter kill.
Winter's on the downhill side now anyway, isn't it?
Oh, should tell that to my heating bill. I live in a dinosaur house built in 1896. They weren't too concerned about insulation back then, I don't think.
No, that's newer than mine, though.
All right, guys. Well, it kind of looks like our questions fizzled out here. So I guess we go ahead and wrap it up. Really big thanks to Mark and to Colton for your time tonight, especially Colton on your birthday. Sorry for asking you to join us on your birthday, but we're glad you did.
My pleasure.
All of this was really